My daughter called me from a gas station parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in February. I knew something was wrong before she even said a word. She's 34 years old, and she still makes the same sound she made when she was 7, that little catch of breath right before the tears come. I heard it and I sat down. I was standing in my kitchen folding dish towels, which sounds like a small thing, but I remember it exactly. I set them on the counter and I sat down. "Mom." That was all she said for a moment. "I'm here," I told her. "Take your time." She was at a Shell station off Route 9 in Hadley, Massachusetts. It was 23 degrees outside. She had her 2 kids in the back seat. My grandson is 6. My granddaughter just turned 4. And she had left the car running for the heat. She had 4 bags, not suitcases, garbage bags, because she had packed in a hurry and there hadn't been time to find the luggage. Her husband's mother had called the police. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it took me a moment to understand what my daughter was telling me. Her mother-in-law had called the police on her, on my daughter. The woman who baked sourdough bread every Saturday and coached her daughter's soccer team and had never, in 34 years, so much as shoplifted a pack of gum. "What did she tell them?" I asked. My daughter took a shaky breath. "That I stole from the business." The business. That word had a particular meaning in that family. My son-in-law's family ran a regional property management company out of Springfield. 3 generations, about 40 employees, contracts with half a dozen commercial landlords across western Massachusetts. When my daughter married into that family 8 years ago, she had been welcomed in with open arms. Or so it appeared. She had eventually taken on a bookkeeping role, part-time at first and then full-time after my granddaughter was born, because the full-time childcare costs made more sense that way. She was good at it. She had a head for numbers that I always envied. She had organized their accounts receivable system from scratch. And now her mother-in-law, a woman named Rosalind, 67 years old, silver bob haircut, the kind of woman who corrects your grammar at the dinner table, had told the police that my daughter had been embezzling from the company for 2 years. The responding officer had not arrested her. There wasn't enough to arrest her on, at least not that day. But Rosalind had made it very clear to my son-in-law that my daughter was not welcome in the house until the matter was resolved. And my son-in-law, a man I had watched grow from a decent boy into something I didn't quite recognize anymore, had said nothing. He had stood in their kitchen and looked at the floor and said nothing while his mother told his wife to leave. My daughter had put her children in the car in 22 minutes. She knew, somewhere in her body, that she needed to move before she lost her nerve. "Okay," I said. "Are the kids fed?" "We just had lunch." "Good. Drive here. Don't stop anywhere else. Call me when you're an hour out." She was quiet for a second. "Mom, I don't have anywhere else to?" "I didn't ask where you had to go," I said. "I said drive here. Now get on 91 South." I hung up and sat there for 60 seconds. Then I stood up and went back to folding my dish towels, because I needed my hands to be doing something ordinary while my mind started working. I am 63 years old. I live alone in a 4-bedroom house in Long Meadow that I have owned outright since 2019. I spent 26 years as a commercial real estate attorney in Hartford, Connecticut, and I retired early, not because I had to, but because I had structured things carefully enough that I could. I am not a woman who panics. I learned a long time ago that panic is a luxury most women can't afford. And I had never been able to afford it either. I also knew Rosalind's company better than Rosalind knew I did. That's the part I hadn't told my daughter. I hadn't told her because it hadn't seemed relevant, and because there are things you protect quietly, in the way you protect a good hand of cards, not out of deception, but out of patience. My daughter arrived at 4:30. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days, which turned out to be accurate. My grandson ran to me and pressed his face into my stomach the way he's done since he could walk. My granddaughter was still half asleep from the drive, her cheek creased from the car seat. I brought them inside and I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from the can, because that is what children need when the world has come apart. Something warm and familiar and reliable. After they were settled in front of a movie, I sat down across from my daughter at the kitchen table. "Tell me everything," I said. "Don't skip anything because you think it doesn't matter. It all matters." She talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I took notes on a legal pad, old habit. By the time she finished, I had 4 pages. Here is what had actually happened. About 8 months earlier, my daughter had noticed some irregularities in the company's accounts. Not large amounts at first. A vendor invoice paid twice, a reimbursement that didn't match a receipt. She had flagged it to her husband, who had told her not to worry about it, that his mother handled some of those accounts directly. She had flagged it again 3 months later when the discrepancies were larger. Her husband had told her, more sharply, that time, to leave it alone. So she had done what a careful woman does. She had started keeping her own records. She had taken photographs of documents on her phone. She had saved copies of invoices to a personal email account, not to do anything with them. Just to have them. Just in case. In case of exactly this. Rosalind had apparently discovered what my daughter was doing, or at least suspected it, and had made a preemptive move. By framing my daughter as the embezzler, she accomplished 2 things. She discredited whatever my daughter might say, and she got her out of the house and away from the records before anyone could look more carefully. It was, I had to admit, not a stupid plan. It just had one problem. "Do you still have the photographs?" I asked. My daughter looked at me. "I have everything. It's all on my phone and in my Gmail." "Okay." I set down my pen. "And did you take anything from the physical office? Any paper documents?" "No, I was too scared." "Good." I looked at my notes. "Don't talk to your husband until I tell you it's all right. Don't respond to anything Rosalind sends you. Don't post anything online. Don't talk to anyone in that family." "What are you going to do?" I looked at my daughter. This woman I had raised through a divorce and 2 moves and a bout of mono in the 10th grade and a broken engagement at 26. And I thought about what I was going to say. I didn't want to give her false comfort. But I also didn't want to burden her with specifics that weren't hers to carry yet. "I'm going to make some calls," I said. The first call I made was to a forensic accountant named Walter Briggs, who had been a professional acquaintance of mine for 15 years. I had referred him work many times over my career. He owed me nothing, but he picked up on the second ring, and he listened carefully, and he said he could have preliminary eyes on the data within 48 hours if my daughter forwarded him the files. The second call I made was to an attorney named Shaw in Springfield, who specialized in employment and business litigation. I had met her at a conference in 2017. I knew her reputation. She was methodical and she was not gentle. The third call I did not make to a person. About 4 years before my daughter's marriage, I had been part of a small investment group, 3 attorneys and a retired banker. that had quietly acquired a commercial property portfolio in the Springfield area. We had done it as a long-term income play. Nothing dramatic. We used an LLC so that the individual names weren't attached. It was entirely legal and entirely private. We had hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day. You can probably see where this is going. The property management company we had hired was Rosalind's company, her family's firm. This was before my daughter had ever met her son. It was a coincidence of geography and professional referral, nothing more. We had been clients for 6 years before I had ever shaken Rosalind's hand at a holiday party and understood who she was. I had never said anything because it hadn't seemed necessary. The business relationship was managed through the LLC. Rosalind dealt with the LLC's representative, who was the retired banker, a man I will call my partner. Because that's all that matters, she did not know my name was attached to it. She did not know that the woman who came to Christmas dinner and brought her famous pecan pie was the same woman whose signature was on a fee agreement that represented 12% of her company's annual contract revenue. I am not proud that I stayed quiet as long as I did. Looking back, I should have disclosed it to my daughter at the very least. But I had told myself it was a non-issue, and I had let it remain one. It was no longer a non-issue. I drove to Springfield on a Thursday morning. I had made an appointment through proper channels for a meeting with the company's senior management. I arrived at 9 o'clock. I wore a charcoal blazer and flat shoes, and I carried the briefcase I had used for most of my career. I did not bring anyone with me. The receptionist brought me to a conference room. I waited. Rosalind walked in 7 minutes later. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse, and her silver bob was perfect. She looked at me the way she always did at family gatherings. That slight elevation of the chin that meant she was establishing something. She did not appear concerned. "This is unexpected," she said. "I imagine it is." She sat down across from me. "If this is about Bethany, I think it's best if we let the professionals handle." I opened my briefcase and set a folder on the table between us. She looked at the folder. Then she looked at me. "You might want to read the first page," I said. It was the LLC agreement. My name was on page 3 as a founding member. Attached to it was our management contract with her company, executed in 2020, renewed twice. Also attached was a letter, drafted the previous evening by my attorney, informing Rosalind's company that we were initiating a formal review of the management account in light of certain concerns that had been brought to our attention regarding financial discrepancies. The concerns, of course, were the same ones my daughter had documented. Rosalind read the first page. She turned to page 3. She was very still. "You never said I wasn't required to," I said. "The business relationship was with the LLC. It still is." She set the folder down. "What do you want? I want to be careful here because I don't want to make it sound like I went in there to threaten anyone. I didn't. What I did was present her with a set of facts and allow her to draw her own conclusions. The facts were these. We had 12% of her annual revenue under contract. Walter Briggs had already flagged discrepancies in the accounts that touched our portfolio specifically. My attorney had a full brief, and a forensic accounting review, once initiated formally, would be very difficult to contain. I also told her that my daughter had documentation, not as a threat, as information. "The thing about records," I said, "is that they tend to tell the truth, even when the people involved don't want them to." Rosalind looked out the window for a long time. I didn't fill the silence. I've sat through enough negotiations to know that silence is not a vacuum you're obligated to fill. The complaint to the police, she finally said. It was made in error. Then I assume you'll correct that error in writing through your attorney, and the review will proceed regardless, I said. But the scope and the audience for those findings is something that reasonable people can discuss. She was quiet again. Then she said, "She doesn't deserve him." And I looked at this woman, the 67-year-old woman who had spent 8 years making my daughter feel like a guest in her own marriage. And I said something I had been composing in the back of my mind for the entire drive up. "That's not for you to decide," I said, "and it never was." I left the folder on the table, and I stood up and I picked up my briefcase. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The formal complaint was withdrawn within 5 business days. It was submitted to the Springfield PD in writing, citing insufficient basis, signed by Rosalind's personal attorney. I have a copy. The forensic review proceeded. Walter Briggs delivered his preliminary report 3 weeks later. The irregularities my daughter had noticed were real. They were not enormous. We were not talking about a Bernie Madoff situation. But they were systematic and they had been ongoing. Rosalind had been quietly billing certain management expenses to our portfolio account without corresponding work orders. It totaled over 4 years, approximately $41,000. $41,000 that she had taken from an account she didn't know I was attached to. We did not pursue criminal charges. I made that decision deliberately. A protracted criminal case would have dragged my daughter's name through the same mud Rosalind had already tried to bury her in, and I didn't want that for her. What we did pursue was a civil claim, which was settled quietly, with full restitution and a clause that I will not describe in detail, but which my attorney described as sufficient. The management contract was not renewed. My son-in-law came to my house 6 weeks after all of this. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair his wife had sat in, and he looked like a man who had recently understood something about himself that he hadn't wanted to understand. He asked if he could talk to his wife. I told him that was her decision, not mine. He nodded and looked at his hands. "I should have said something," he said. "Yes," I said, "you should have." He asked me if I thought she would ever forgive him. I told him I didn't know. I told him that forgiveness wasn't something he could plan for or negotiate toward. It would happen or it wouldn't, and that was between the two of them. I poured him a cup of coffee because he was the father of my grandchildren, and because I was raised to be hospitable even when I am angry. He drank it and he thanked me, and he left. My daughter is still living here. It has been 4 months. She is sleeping better. She started running again last month. She used to run 5Ks before the kids were born, and I used to tease her about her ridiculous neon sneakers. She has them on now most mornings when I come downstairs. She is talking to a therapist. She and her husband are in counseling together, which is their choice, and I am not inserting myself into it. My grandson has started asking if we can get a dog. There's a Saturday morning now that I keep returning to in my mind. About 3 weeks after everything had settled, my granddaughter and I were in the backyard while my daughter was on her run. The yard still had a little frost on the grass, that thin white kind that burns off by 9. My granddaughter was looking for worms. She had a stick, and she was very seriously turning over a patch of dirt near the garden bed, narrating to herself in that private way small children do. I watched her for a while, and I thought about all the things that had almost gone the other way. If my daughter hadn't kept those records, if she had panicked at the gas station instead of calling me, if I had walked into that conference room with anger instead of patience, any one of those things, and it would have gone differently. I don't tell this story because I won the argument or because Rosalind was held accountable, though those things matter. I tell it because of what my daughter said to me the night before she started running again. She came downstairs after the kids were asleep, and she sat with me and we had decaf coffee. And she said, "I keep thinking I should have known it was going to go wrong." "You couldn't have known," I told her. "But there were signs." "There are always signs," I said. "That doesn't mean you caused it." She was quiet for a minute, and she said, "How did you stay so calm through all of it?" I thought about that. I thought about the dish towels. I thought about the 60 seconds I sat at my kitchen table before I stood back up. "I stayed calm," I said, "because I knew that losing my composure would feel good for about 30 seconds, and then it would cost us everything. Calm is a choice. It's the hardest choice usually, but it's the one that works." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to be like that." "You already are," I told her. "You kept the records. You called me from a parking lot instead of driving off a bridge. That's composure. That's the thing itself." She leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she used to do when she was 12, and we sat there in the kitchen while the house was quiet around us. And I thought, not for the first time, that the people who think power looks like volume and aggression have never watched a careful woman work. It doesn't look like winning. Winning is the last 10 seconds of a very long game. It looks like keeping your records organized. It looks like a briefcase and flat shoes and sitting in a conference room and not filling the silence. It looks like a cup of coffee you pour for someone you're angry with, because the children need their father to be someone they can reach. My granddaughter didn't find any worms that Saturday. She did, however, find what she announced was a very interesting rock, which she carried inside and placed on my kitchen windowsill where it still sits. That's the part I think about most, honestly. Not the folder on the table. Not Rosalind's face when she turned to page 3. The rock on the windowsill. My granddaughter, completely unconcerned with everything that had nearly broken our family, deciding that this particular rock was worth keeping and that my windowsill was the right place for it. Children are very good at knowing what matters. I'm still learning. I've been thinking lately about what it actually means to protect someone. Not the dramatic version. Not the kind you see in movies where someone sweeps in and delivers a speech and the crowd goes silent. I mean the real kind. The quiet kind. The kind that looks, from the outside, like a woman folding dish towels. When my daughter called me from that parking lot, she had nothing. 4 garbage bags. 2 children. 23 degrees outside and no plan beyond the next hour. And what she needed from me in that moment wasn't rage on her behalf, as much as I felt it. What she needed was someone who had kept their wits and their records and their patience for long enough that they actually had something useful to offer. That's the part nobody talks about. We talk about standing up for people. We don't talk about the years of quiet preparation that makes standing up worth anything at all. Rosalind had spent years building the assumption that she was untouchable. That assumption wasn't entirely wrong. In most circumstances, it would have held. She had money. She had a family name in that town. She had a son who deferred to her. What she didn't have was information. She didn't know what my daughter had saved on her phone. She didn't know whose name was on page 3 of that LLC agreement. She made her move based on what she thought she knew, and what she thought she knew was incomplete. That's the thing about people who believe their own power too completely. They stop looking for what they might have missed. My daughter had done the right thing long before any of this came to a head. She had noticed something wrong, and she had documented it. Carefully, quietly, without making a scene. She had kept her records even when her husband told her to let it go. She had held on to the truth, even when holding on to it cost her peace of mind. That's not luck. That's character. And character is the one thing that can't be taken from you in 22 minutes while someone else is making phone calls. I think about the choices that led to that Saturday morning in my backyard, my granddaughter turning over dirt with a stick, looking for worms, completely unaware of how close things had come to going another way. Every one of those choices was made by an ordinary person in an ordinary moment. My daughter deciding to save a photograph instead of deleting it. Me deciding years earlier to structure an investment through an LLC with proper documentation. Walter picking up on the second ring. None of those things felt significant at the time. They were just the right thing done quietly, without fanfare. That's what I want my daughter to take from all of this. Not that her mother came in and saved her, because that's not the full story. The full story is that she saved herself first. She did it before she even knew she needed to. She did it in the small daily choices that most people never notice because they're too busy looking for the dramatic gesture. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself. It keeps records. It waits. It sits across a conference table and does not fill the silence. It pours coffee for someone it's angry with because the long game matters more than the satisfying moment. I'm not a perfect woman. I stayed quiet about that business connection longer than I should have. I tell myself it was irrelevant until it wasn't. And that's mostly true, but I also know I was comfortable. And comfort makes you slow. What I hope my daughter learned, what I hope anyone watching takes from this, is that integrity is not something you perform in a crisis. It's something you build in the years before the crisis arrives so that when the moment comes, you actually have something to stand on. The rock is still on my windowsill. My granddaughter hasn't asked for it back. I think she knew it belonged there.